The lanterns flickered violently in the sudden gust of wind. On the cobblestone streets of Salem, Massachusetts, the year was 1692. A girl screamed, not from pain, but from a vision. She claimed she saw a shadowy woman flying above the church steeple. Moments later, fire engulfed the town square, or so they said. Exactly 1,617 miles away, and exactly 100 years later, another woman, this time dressed in deep crimson robes, stood barefoot on the muddy banks of the Mississippi River. She hummed an ancient melody passed from Dahomey ancestors. Around her, dozens watched in silence as the voodoo priestess, known only as Marie, pulled bones from a sack and cast them on the earth. Moments later, a man in New Orleans dropped dead of a heart attack. 2 women, 2 towns, 2 centuries apart. But here's the real question. Which one truly held the power? Historical context. Salem, 1692. Salem wasn't just a town. It was a living paranoia wrapped in wooden homes and Puritan morality. The winters were brutal, the crops unreliable. Death hovered constantly. And when teenage girls, Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams, began convulsing and screaming of specters tormenting them, no one questioned the supernatural. Witchcraft was the only explanation that made sense to their world. 20 people were executed. One man, Giles Corey, was crushed slowly under stones. Children accused mothers. Neighbors turned on neighbors. The accused often didn't even know the name of their accuser. The justice system collapsed under hysteria. But here's what most don't know. Many victims of the Salem trials had ties to midwives, herbal healers, or were women who owned land. Signs of independence that scared the ruling men. One historian, Dr. Margaret Ainsley, claimed in a fictional interview, it wasn't just fear of magic, it was fear of female autonomy. Witchcraft was the label they used to erase women who stepped outside their assigned roles. The echoes of their screams still haunt the old houses. Locals say that on cold October nights you can hear scratching on the walls of the Salem Witch House, a place that never burned, despite a firestorm in 1711 that devoured everything around it. Now shift the lens to New Orleans, where voodoo wasn't feared, it was revered and whispered about. It was protection, justice, and at times, vengeance. In the early 1800s, the city was a chaotic blend of French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean cultures. The enslaved brought with them the totally ancestral spirits worshipped through rituals. Unlike the Puritan North, New Orleans had no clear lines between religion and the occult. That's when Marie Laveau rose to power. Born in 1801, Laveau was a free woman of color who trained as a hairdresser and healer. But she soon became something more: a priestess, oracle, and legend. It's said she could make judges reverse decisions, heal diseases doctors couldn't name, and even bring misfortune to anyone who crossed her. She was seen entering cemeteries at midnight, dancing with snakes, surrounded by men in trances. Some say she never died, that she walks still, wearing white with glowing eyes through the tombstones of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. In an imagined quote, a Creole woman named Josette Baptiste, who lived in 1830, said, "Marie Laveau didn't threaten. She just looked at you, and the river listened," developing the mystery, unseen threads. Now here's where it gets strange. In 1904, a journal was discovered in an old Massachusetts barn. It contained sketches of voodoo dolls, Latin incantations, and the name Laveau. But the journal was dated 1693, decades before Marie's birth. Could someone have traveled between worlds of witchcraft and voodoo long before we thought they were connected? Fast forward to 1987. A young girl in New Orleans fell into a coma after playing a children's game called Witch's Dance, a local variation of Ring Around the Rosie. The game's origins? Traced back to post-Salem folk songs. Linguist and folklorist Dr. Ethan Morales wrote in his fictional paper, "There are rhythm patterns, chants, and keywords that bridge Salem's witch trials and New Orleans voodoo traditions. Someone, or something, has been keeping both flames alive. And then there's the fact that in both locations, cats vanish during certain moon phases, especially black ones. Local animal shelters confirmed patterns. Coincidence? Or a sign that something ancient still stirs? Present-day pop culture, the witch never died. Modern media didn't forget these legends. They fed on them. TV shows like American Horror Story, Coven mixed Salem witches and New Orleans voodoo queens in a showdown of spells and blood. The villain? Sometimes both. Video games like Assassin's Creed, Liberation feature voodoo hexes. Horror movies like The Witch and The Skeleton Key draw aesthetic, lore, and fear directly from these traditions. In fact, there's a booming tourism industry around both. Salem gets over 1 million visitors every October, while New Orleans voodoo shops earn millions yearly. Witch hats and voodoo dolls share shelf space in airport gift shops. But more than just entertainment, these archetypes represent something deeper. Women wielding forbidden power. But perhaps the eeriest sign that the legends still breathe is this. In both cities, fires have mysteriously erupted on the anniversaries of their darkest days, and in both, no cause was ever found. The first summer rains often bring the smell of wet earth and old wood to the alleys of New Orleans. But in the early morning hours of June 24, 1933, the smell was different. Residents of the Tremy neighborhood awoke to a strong aroma of sulfur and burning cloves. At the corner of Ursulines Avenue and St. Claude Street, 3 black candles still burned in front of a wrought iron gate. No wind could extinguish them. Beside it, a rag doll with pins stuck in its left breast was found by a local police officer, who refused to touch it. He simply wrote in his report, "She was looking at me." The next morning, 2 houses on the same block caught fire without explanation. Firefighters said there was no short circuit, no gas, no lit candles, just ashes and silence. A resident, 78-year-old Clarice, claimed to have seen a woman dressed in white walk through the flames as if made of wind. She said her eyes were like 2 embers, but without hatred, just a warning. Meanwhile, nearly 2,000 miles to the north, an equally bizarre phenomenon was occurring in the small town of Danvers, Massachusetts, formerly known as Salem Village. In 1947, students at Danvers State Hospital reported hearing chanting in Old French in the early morning hours, coming from the hospital's abandoned basement. The building had been closed for sanitary reasons since 1939, but no one dared enter. Records from the psychiatric school, later collected by local investigators, indicated that strange symbols had been drawn with charcoal on the walls, a combination of crosses, 8-pointed stars, and circles with inscriptions in Haitian Creole. What unites these 2 events? Nothing, at least officially. But a pattern begins to emerge, obscure as the mists of a swamp, the collision of 2 hidden lineages that refuse to disappear. Salem and New Orleans seem to breathe in each other, even though separated by centuries and geography. A document dated 1862, discovered in the private library of Tulane University in New Orleans, mentions a woman named Abigail Mortain. According to the writings, she was a direct descendant of Ann Putnam Jr., one of Salem's main accusers. Interestingly, Abigail traveled to New Orleans during the Civil War, claiming to be searching for Marie's mirror, a supposed relic that allowed one to see through time. Abigail's diary, partially damaged by moisture, describes encounters with voodoo practitioners and rituals performed on Bayou St. John, where time seemed to stand still and voices from the past could be heard whispering in the trees. Some modern scholars, such as the fictional professor Tobias Langridge, a specialist in African-American syncretic cultures, suggest that the Salem legends didn't end in Massachusetts. They simply migrated, absorbed into New Orleans practices. He writes in his work, Portals of the Forgotten, that there is evidence of Puritan symbols of protection being incorporated into early 20th century voodoo practices. It's as if the witches of the North, silenced by the gallows and fear, had found a new way to survive in the waters of the South. But what about the central figures of these stories? If Marie Laveau remains a quasi-mythological entity in the New Orleans imagination, in Salem there exists a lesser-known but equally feared figure, Deliverance Dane. Her name surfaced in 1706 in secret church records after she was accused of keeping a grimoire, a book of ancient magic with supposedly druid origins. The document was never found, but a house where she allegedly lived was demolished in 1934 after a series of incidents involving sudden madness and disappearances of children in the vicinity. Authorities have never made a direct connection, but locals avoid the place to this day. Interestingly, in 1972, a New Orleans tourist named Paul D. Roux visited Salem and photographed a strange sculpture partially buried near the former foundation of the Deliverance House. The object appeared to be made of clay and shells, with distorted human features and empty eyes. Upon returning to New Orleans, Paul disappeared. His car was found abandoned in front of Marie Laveau's grave. On the driver's seat lay only the developed photograph. It's not difficult to see that, beyond the official stories, there's an undercurrent connecting these women. Both were accused, feared, and exalted. Both tapped into invisible forces that challenged the control of the patriarchal society of their times. But above all, both became legends, not because they were evil, but because they were uncontrollable. These days, this tension is reflected on social media, where young adherents of esoteric practices create challenges invoking the spirit of Salem or asking Laveau for blessings. Hashtags like Christ Salem summoning and Voodoo visions rack up millions of views on TikTok. Many do this out of curiosity, others out of belief, but some report consequences. A young woman from Houston named Casey Lynn posted a video claiming to have dreamed 3 nights in a row of a hooded woman whispering in French. After the 4th day, her cat disappeared, and her bedroom was found with circular marks on the ceiling. It's not just teenagers seeking likes. Film directors, screenwriters, and musicians continue to explore this mythology. The 2018 reboot of Charmed directly references a lineage of witches that allegedly split between the north and south of the United States. In The Originals, a spin-off of The Vampire Diaries, New Orleans is the stage where white and black magic collide, and the figure of Marie Laveau is constantly evoked, albeit under fictionalized names. There are also independent documentaries, such as Witch Lines, shown at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2021, which proposes the theory that energy lines, similar to the ley lines in England, cross Salem and New Orleans, explaining the unexplained phenomena in both cities. The lead researcher, fictional Dr. Eleanor Quinn, states that where these lines cross, time bends, and that's where they go. Tourists continue to flock to the same spots year after year. In Salem, the former prison where the accused women were allegedly held receives thousands of visitors in October. In New Orleans, Laveau's tomb is so popular that local authorities have implemented vandalism protection measures. Still, every year symbols appear painted in red around the mausoleum, even under constant surveillance. No camera has ever captured the perpetrator. And amidst all this, the question continues to echo. Are these manifestations merely the result of a collective imagination, fueled by centuries of stories, fears, and repressed desires? Or is there, in fact, something more? Some say legends are just mirrors, showing what's already inside us. But mirrors also reflect what we don't want to see. And maybe, just maybe, these 2 cities are half-open doors to a world where the inexplicable doesn't need permission to enter. In the end, the real question may not be who was more dangerous, the Salem witches or the Voodoo queens. The real question may be, what happens when these 2 bloodlines meet in the same body, the same soul? Is there any way to stop this fusion? The signs are everywhere. The problem is, no one is willing to look long enough. There are never digitized archives, forgotten reports in the basements of small libraries, and handwritten notes in the margins of books that seem to have been written by hands trembling with fear. It is in these corners, far from the reach of the internet and prying eyes, that fragments of a deeper truth begin to emerge. A truth that doesn't fit into school textbooks or horror movie scripts. A truth that whispers that what happened in Salem didn't end in 1692, and that the power that flourished in the swamps of New Orleans wasn't buried with Marie Laveau. In 1955, a young assistant professor at Harvard University named Bernard Kessler found an untitled grimoire in a Boston antique shop, bound in dark leather, with pages written in a combination of Latin and patois. He submitted the book for linguistic analysis, but within 3 weeks, he resigned and disappeared from view. Years later, a janitor found a copy of a report hidden in a basement shelf at Widener Library. In it, Kessler claimed to have discovered that the book belonged to a silent sisterhood of women who migrated from Salem to New Orleans between 1710 and 1760. According to him, the grimoire spoke of an ancient practice where blood, soil, and silence create a bond that transcends death. The document was suppressed by academic authorities, but it reached the hands of an independent anthropologist named Vera Delaney, who has spent the last 20 years investigating hybrid rituals that emerged in Louisiana. According to Delaney, there is clear evidence that a secret lineage of women, informally referred to as the 3 Shadows, has been operating behind the scenes of historical events for over 200 years. These women are believed to be direct descendants of the Salem women, who escaped lynching and infiltrated Southern Creole society, absorbing voodoo and adapting it to their occult practices. Delaney's theory seems absurd at first glance, but it finds its echo in a series of disturbing coincidences. In 1981, the city of Baton Rouge reported the disappearance of 3 women during a lightning storm. They had all attended a spiritual retreat at a former plantation known as Belle Noire. Sheriff's records indicate that 3 broken ceramic bowls, barefoot prints, and symbols scratched into the wood with what appeared to be human fingernails were found. A diary left by one of the missing women contained only one sentence repeated 5 times. The Mud Sister recognizes the salt. These words may seem meaningless, but in an apocryphal manuscript attributed to Cotton Mather, a central figure in the Salem trials, there is a similar quote: "Clay knows not water, but fears the salt that breaks it down." This correlation between texts separated by centuries and such distinct contexts cannot be dismissed as coincidence. There is a code that runs through generations and hides in plain sight. The connection between Salem and New Orleans seems to intensify during times of great cultural upheaval. In the 1960s, at the height of the counterculture movement, there was an explosion of esoteric groups claiming to channel the forgotten voices of the burning and the drowning. In 1968, a group called the Silent Waters performed a collective ritual on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. According to newspapers at the time, hundreds participated. Hours later, a series of blackouts hit parts of the city, and reports of people in a trance walking naked through the streets were recorded by police. On the same day, in Massachusetts, a group of Salem State College students reported the appearance of a woman dressed in black, with empty eyes, in the school's bell tower. Investigations have never found a direct link, but the date and time of the 2 events coincide exactly. Fast forward to 2006, when Hurricane Katrina had already devastated New Orleans, leaving physical and emotional scars on the city. But something else emerged from the waters. During rescue efforts, a group of volunteers discovered an underground cave beneath a destroyed house in the Treme neighborhood. The cave was sealed with an iron door and carved with a strange symbol, a combination of a Celtic cross and Papa Legba's Veve. Inside, they found human bones, candles still partially melted, and a mural drawn in dried blood depicting a woman split in half in a Puritan colonial dress, half in a white turban and beaded necklaces. Authorities classified it as a satanic ritual and sealed off the site. But a rescue team volunteer, Rachel Duvall, took a photo before police arrived. This image circulated on occult forums, where users began calling the mural's figure the Crossroads Mother. Since then, reports have emerged across the country of people claiming to have seen this figure in dreams, often before significant or traumatic events. In some cases, the appearance is followed by inexplicable bursts of creativity. Composers write entire pieces in a night. Painters create disturbing works in styles they've never studied. Writers record stories they claim never to have experienced. All mention a feminine presence, steady, observant, and faceless. The consequences of this type of manifestation don't stop at the symbolic level. In 2018, the city of Salem was the scene of an incident involving a modern witchcraft convention. During the event, a woman named Lena Horrocks, an expert in neo-pagan practices, collapsed suddenly after touching a ceremonial object brought by a group from New Orleans. The object, a staff carved with runes and bones, was later identified as a funerary item used in voodoo spiritual transmutation ceremonies. Horrocks survived but reported having visions of a city of fire and voices singing in 2 languages at once. These are not isolated episodes. Stories like these have multiplied, and the common thread between them remains clear. Where Salem ends, New Orleans begins. As if the same spirit had taken different forms to survive time, persecution, and modern rationality. Pop culture absorbs these signals like fragmented mirrors. Films like Midnight Spell and Veil of Saints portray female protagonists torn between occult lineages of the North and South, in narratives that blend doomsday with ancestral rituals. Games like Bloodline put players in the shoes of descendants of witches who must choose between the blood of Salem or the soul of New Orleans. The urban Gothic aesthetic, born in the 2000s, is marked by the fusion of Puritan elements with Afro-Caribbean symbols. The world seems not only fascinated, but obsessed with piecing together a puzzle that few fully understand. The real issue may not be merely historical or cultural. Perhaps it is spiritual, an inevitable reunion between two poles of repressed feminine power, now liberated and increasingly aware of each other. What if these manifestations are not just echoes, but summons? What if the past is trying to reunite with itself through the bodies, minds, and rituals of the living? The town of Salem is already showing signs of unrest. Residents report sudden changes in the weather, sightings of female figures in period costume in open fields, and a growing number of visitors who claim to feel a presence calling them by name. In New Orleans, tour guides have reported that electronic equipment frequently fails near Laveau's grave, and that voices appear on recordings, speaking in archaic English and mixed patois. What's about to happen may not be just another comparison between two occult traditions. It may be the preparation for a convergence, a meeting point between the Salem witches and the Voodoo queens, a fusion that may be unstoppable. After all, what happens when the wail of the gallows meets the drums of the swamps? It was a windless night in New Orleans' French Quarter when the old bell of St. Louis Cathedral rang. The city seemed suspended in time. The streetlights flickered briefly, and in the alleys between the colonial mansions, shadows seemed to move in directions that didn't follow the logic of light. In Jackson Square, a group of tourists crowded around a guide dressed in a long ecru cotton skirt and red scarf. She told the story of a woman who never died, who returned in every generation, with different names, but the same eyes. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts, the small village of Marblehead, a quiet neighbor of Salem, was experiencing a series of unexplained events. 3 houses lost power simultaneously. Clocks stopped at 3:33 a.m. Witnesses claimed to have seen a woman on the roof of the old schoolhouse, her arms outstretched, her hair flowing in the wind, a non-existent figure. The most disturbing account came from a 9-year-old boy who said the woman sang with her mouth closed and her eyes glowed like buried candles. These events, however isolated they may seem, are part of a cycle that has been accelerating in recent decades. It's as if forces that were once silenced, burned, or locked away are awakening with unprecedented clarity. And there are signs that the very land where these stories took place holds memories. In 2021 excavations in the area of ancient Salem village, archaeologists found altar stones, pieces of carved glass, and a strange metal artifact that seemed to vibrate when touched. It was a small box with inscriptions in French and Old English, containing a lock of hair braided with gold thread and a fragment of bone. When researchers attempted to take the object to Boston for analysis, all of the car's electrical systems failed, and it had to be towed. In New Orleans, during recent renovations in Congo Square, workers discovered tunnels connecting ancient cemeteries and caves where European symbols shared space with African veves. A line written on the wall caught their attention. The shadow travels through the root, the blood recognizes the clay. The phrase also appeared in an anonymous manuscript found in Salem in 1898. This suggests not only cultural exchange, but a continuous, perhaps even coordinated lineage between figures from both traditions. This interconnection is not only historical, but also spiritual and emotional. And today, with the expansion of social media and pop culture, we are witnessing a new layer of this phenomenon. The past is infiltrating the present through art, music, and narratives we consume without realizing their hidden origins. The influence of these historical figures has become so profound that they no longer inhabit forgotten books or archives. They live in images, sounds, and symbols that spread like invisible viruses. For many, it begins subtly. A dream with faces you've never seen but recognize. A scent of herbal smoke in a locked room. An ancient song that seems to play on its own just as you're about to fall asleep. Small signs. But for others, the signs become calls. People who decide to move to another city, study the occult, tattoo words in dead languages. People who claim to have been touched by something greater, something they can't name. It's impossible to ignore the number of films, series, and songs that echo these themes. The song Black Root Red Flame by the fictional band Veil Mirror, released in 2022, went viral for including chants recorded with Creole sounds and samples of reversed Puritan sermons. The music video shows 2 women walking slowly toward each other, one emerging from a swamp and the other from a wintry forest, until they touch and everything explodes into silence. Behind the scenes, film directors and showrunners report strange incidents during filming. One, responsible for an independent production based on Abigail Williams's letters, claims that all the clocks on set stopped working during a key scene involving summoning. The recording had to be done 3 times because the audio always picked up an extra voice, whispering in an unknown language. This convergence of the occult and entertainment is shaping a new form of popular belief. An entire generation that doesn't identify with traditional religions is finding in the myths of Salem and the entities of New Orleans a new kind of faith. More fluid, more personal, but equally powerful. These are young people who gather not in temples, but in forests, on rooftops, on candlelit porches. They don't ask for protection, they ask for connection. These new urban cults, however fragmented, share a common core: the female figure as the axis of power and forbidden wisdom. In contemporary circles, both Marie Laveau and the Salem accused are revered as archetypes, symbols of resistance, ancestry, and contained fury. And it is this point that sparks a new fear among conservative scholars and theologians: the fact that myth has surpassed symbolism and begun to operate as a real presence in everyday life. Fictional writer James Northall, author of When Fire Marries Mud, proposes a disturbing theory: that we are witnessing the birth of a new mythical entity, a synthesis of northern witches and southern priestesses. According to him, shared dreams, intersecting symbols, simultaneous events, and cultural expressions are manifestations of an emerging consciousness, collective, feminine, and perhaps vengeful. And here is where the initial question resurfaces with greater force: who is more dangerous? The woman accused of witchcraft in Salem, or the Voodoo queen in New Orleans? Who holds more power? The one silenced and persecuted, or the one heard and feared? Or are they two faces of the same spirit that refuse to be erased from history? And now I want to hear from you. Which of these figures has most captured your imagination so far? Which city do you think carries the most intense energy? Salem, with its shadows of judgment and regret, or New Orleans, with its songs that still echo on street corners and in cemeteries? Leave a comment with your theory, your guess, your experience. If you've visited any of these places, share your feelings. Some people come away feeling different. If this story has captivated you so far, consider subscribing. But it's not an obligation. Do so to continue this journey with us. Because what you're watching isn't just a video. It's part of an ongoing living investigation that isn't over yet, and there's much more to come. In the next section, we'll explore unofficial records that indicate that similar figures continued to emerge at regular intervals in both Salem and New Orleans. These apparitions, spiritual leaders, and documented events suggest that these women's legacy not only survived, but spread, creating living, influential, and invisible lineages. Official history, the kind recorded in school textbooks and tourist signs, tells us that the women tried in Salem were victims of mass hysteria, and that Marie Laveau was simply a charismatic voodoo practitioner who gained fame for her healing and counseling skills. But if we follow the undocumented trails, the forgotten accounts and personal letters, the testimonies collected orally for generations, we begin to notice that the same figures seem to reappear in different eras under different names, but with the same signs: ancestral wisdom, mastery over invisible elements, and an inexplicable ability to alter the course of events around them. In 1919, a woman named Eliza Tremblay appeared in a village near Salem. With no official birth records, Eliza was described as having fair skin, amber eyes, and a deep voice. She didn't attend church, but she always knew who was sick, even before symptoms appeared. It was said that she buried fruit at crossroads and spoke to the dead by the Ipswich River. For 2 consecutive winters, when the town faced epidemics of flu and pneumonia, the homes of those who visited her seemed immune to the contagion. No scientific explanation was found. In 1921, Eliza disappeared without a trace. The only thing found in her home was a diary with pages written in archaic French and drawings of symbols mixing voodoo vivés with typical Puritan protective markings. Decades later, in 1973, New Orleans witnessed the emergence of an equally enigmatic figure. Her name was Nadine Lacroix. She emerged as a spiritual guide in the Bywater neighborhood and quickly gained a following among musicians, artists, and intellectuals. Her outdoor ceremonies drew hushed crowds. Lacroix claimed to speak with the spirits of the North and South, and in one of her public statements, recorded by a local journalist, she asserted that The salt of Salem was dissolved in the clay of the Mississippi. 3 weeks after this statement, a statue of the Virgin Mary in an abandoned chapel appeared with red marks on its eyes, and the priest in charge of the parish suffered a nervous breakdown. Lacroix disappeared in 1975, shortly after an unexplained fire in the mansion where she performed her rituals. The fire destroyed everything except a gilt-framed mirror that reflected the room as if it were still intact. Authorities dismissed both cases as urban legends or hoaxes, but independent scholars have noted patterns that deserve attention. Both Eliza and Nadine emerged during periods of social crisis and institutional collapse. Both speak of a time before colonization, mention burnt roots and voices in stone, and have knowledge of extinct languages. Even more disturbing, both disappear without a trace, as if they had fulfilled a function the world was not ready to understand. There are reports of other women with similar characteristics appearing in Detroit, Atlanta, Denver, and even Anchorage, always linked to unusual phenomena: outbreaks of collective dreams, unexplained drops in temperature indoors, objects moving on their own, plants blooming out of season. In all these places, there's a phrase repeated by different witnesses: "She knew before it happened." This perception of time as something malleable seems to be a constant among these figures. They don't predict the future, they remember it. In 1999, a clandestine symposium held at a remote Louisiana estate brought together occultists, historians, and anthropologists to discuss what they called the threshold bloodline. According to confidential reports, they discussed the possibility of a secret bloodline passed down from generation to generation, directly linking some of the women executed in Salem to voodoo practitioners in New Orleans. This hypothesis was based not only on genealogical documents but also on mitochondrial DNA tests, which showed an anomalous recurrence of certain genetic markers linked to electromagnetic hypersensitivity and synesthesia. The research was never officially published, and many of the participants disappeared from academic circles in the following years. However, interest in these figures is not limited to academia. Paramilitary groups and radical religious sects have begun monitoring and persecuting people who display characteristics associated with this lineage. In 2007, a 19-year-old woman named Clarissa Poe was found catatonic in a Texas shelter. During therapy sessions, she quietly repeated a phrase that no one could translate. A Haitian linguist, upon hearing the recording, identified the expression as a plea for protection addressed to the spirit known as Maman Brigitte, but spoken with a completely unfamiliar accent. Clarissa disappeared from the clinic one rainy morning. The security cameras stopped working at 3:33 a.m. Her bed was covered in lavender flowers and oak leaves. There were no footprints, no signs of escape, only a circular mark on the floor with the symbol of a serpent entwined with an inverted wooden cross. These cases, though dismissed as folklore or delusion by many, point to an increasingly concrete possibility: the existence of a silent, living network that spans time and space, connecting women with a sensitivity beyond the ordinary, with a kind of knowledge that cannot be taught, only remembered. A knowledge that comes not from books, but from the earth, from blood, from pain, and from a connection with the dead. These women don't follow organized religions. They listen to what the earth whispers, what the water hides, what the fire demands. They emerge in moments of rupture, of change. They don't ask permission. They don't beg forgiveness. They are there to remind us that the world has rules older than any written law. And now, at this point in history, you who follow us may be wondering, what does all this have to do with me? And the answer is simple. You live on these stories. You walk on these routes. You breathe the same air they once shaped with whispered prayers and ancestral gestures. The cities we live in, the songs we sing, the words we use, everything carries traces of these presences. Even if you don't believe it, even if you doubt it, the past is still here. The future, perhaps, is already compromised. And if this story awakened something in you, a memory, a discomfort, an image, know that this is no coincidence. As the ancient practitioners say, you don't find these stories, they find you. In the next section, we'll delve into records of historical disappearances linked to mysterious female figures in border areas between New England and the Deep South. We'll analyze documents that indicate that government organizations attempted to erase traces of this lineage throughout the 20th century, and how even these attempts failed in the face of that which refuses to be buried.